Tri-Cities. It's Friday at 9 o'clock, so it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl from Tridec, your local economic development council. This morning, we've got some special guests on, as we do every time. All of our guests are special. But today, we're going to talk about the Pasco Airport and airline service in general. So it's my pleasure to introduce Buck Taft. Buck's the airport director for the Pasco Airport. Morning, Buck. Oop, you're on mute.
I'm the one that did it.
There you go.
Good morning, Karl. How are you?
Good, and thanks for taking one for the team. Like you know, there's always got to be something. So Jack and I really appreciate you stepping up. Yeah. Jack Penning is the managing partner for Volaire. I almost said Volaire. I'm sorry. It was stuck in my mind, Jack. I don't know if you ever get that, but Jack and his firm represent Pasco Airport and is the airline air service consultant. And Jack does an amazing job. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. You know, Volaire is just a made up word. I think I told you guys that, but the VOL, vol in French means flight. And we were coming up with a name for the company 6 years ago, and we just put air after flight. So there you go. So it gets pronounced wrong a lot. So don't feel badly about that. But yeah, I've been the air service development consultant in the Tri-Cities for I'm going back, it's about 17 or 18 years now, believe it or not. The first project I worked on was the Denver service on United, which has been in place for more than 15 years. So it's been a great run, and it's been so exciting to see what's happened in this market over time and really how it's recovering right now.
That's great. And that's a great precursor into what we're going to talk today, Jack. Well, let's start off with coffee mugs or coffee stories. I obviously wanted to support Port of Pasco this morning. I've got my Pasco Airport mug as well, but Port of Pasco is obviously the owner of the Pasco Airport, and they're great partners for us. From Randy and Steven and the rest of the team, do an amazing job in economic development, property management. We've worked together just in a couple of years I've been here on many projects along with Buck at the airport. And, I'd really describe our relationship as a great partnership and team. Just want to give a shout out to everybody for the port. And of course, the board and commissioners all do a great job. We really appreciate that. So hopefully that set you up really well, Buck. So go ahead.
You sure made Randy's day. I'll get to hear this when I'm finished. But for those that know me, I don't drink coffee, but I do drink about a gallon of water a day. So I have my trusty mug that's all beat up. It's a metal jug that I dropped several times. It's dented and it's just old faithful. So
wow. Now is it 1 gallon? So
it's a half a gallon.
Okay.
So I drink 2 a day.
Okay. All right. Wait, just out of curiosity, what time do you usually finish up with that second one? Is it?
I finished the first one. I finished the first one by 6:30, and the second one, it's hard to get the second one down. I'm not quite as thirsty, so I finished that one by the time I go home for the day. So about 4:30.
All right. Sounds good. Jack, what do you got for us?
So, I drink a gallon too, but it is coffee that I'm drinking, and I have the most appropriate.
Oh, there you go.
Tri-Cities Airport. There you go. And I have, I really like an espresso because I like to get that, well, I don't like to take the time to do a real espresso. And I just punch a button, but I still get, the creaminess and everything. So I wanted to give you guys a tip on the best pods for your espresso. They're L'Or. Yeah. It's this thing called or rose. It means golden rose in French. Now, the only problem with this is the only place you can buy these is in Europe. So you have to get on a plane. You got to go to Europe, and then you fill up your suitcase with these, which is what I actually do. And then you're set for like the next 6 months. You need, I get about, I say about 400 pods each time I go over. And that lasts me about 4 or 5 months. So there you go.
Awesome. That is, in your business, you obviously get a chance to explore kind of those, supply chain issues just like that. That's really appreciate you sharing that with us, Jack. That's cool.
It helps that I go there for business. So I'm there anyway, right? Yeah. But, I have my favorite things from all over, and you bring them home, and then you can enjoy them in your Tri-Cities mug.
Well, there you go. That's perfect. Jack, I know you got some slides for us. Why don't we start with maybe you kind of just give us that overview of how are things going in the industry in general, and how are we kind of coming back from the pandemic? And then I think you've got some numbers there that look at Pasco Airport too. You can share with us, and then we'll jump into conversation.
Sure. I will share my screen. And kind of, I bring this up not to bore everybody with PowerPoint, but it's easier for me to kind of explain what's going on if I've got the numbers and you guys can see kind of what's happening. But Tri-Cities Airport is really fortunate to have the capacity that we have, because the major thing facing regional air service right now is a lack of pilots. There's a massive pilot shortage. Basically created, we knew a pilot shortage was coming before the pandemic, but it was exacerbated by the pandemic, is the best way to put it. So during the pandemic, about 8,000 pilots for the major carriers took early retirement buyouts. So the carriers, you know, as we saw travel just collapse in 2020, and that's, you know, I was on Coffee with Karl back then talking to you guys, and we're saying we aren't sure when the demand is going to come back. The carriers took a very conservative view of that and offered, frankly, too many pilots early retirement, and so many of them took early retirement that when demand came back wholeheartedly, which we're seeing today, we just don't have enough pilots to fly the same schedule that was flown before the pandemic started. And so there are very few available pilots. They're mostly coming from the regionals, which means the regionals don't have pilots to backfill. And so there's also just a huge training backlog as carriers are trying, you know, to basically fly their schedules and bring new pilots on to fly their schedules. It's taking too long to train them. And you've seen, especially with Alaska Airlines, very transparent about the fact they've had to cancel about 10% of their flights over the last 6 weeks because they simply don't have enough pilots. They scheduled May with 63 more pilots than they have. And so that's a lot. That's many flights a day that have to be canceled. So this is essentially what's causing service to degrade in many communities. For example, Walla Walla, which is just down the road from us, will only have one flight a day total this fall. Just one flight in the middle of the day. That will be their only flight. Before the pandemic, they have 3 or 4 a day, depending on the season. So about 25% of normal capacity. It makes it very hard to use small regional airports. And it's going to put more emphasis on Tri-Cities Airport in Pasco being the regional hub and bringing in passengers from all over, from Yakima, from Walla Walla, from Pendleton, because there aren't flights at those other communities. Part of what's happened too is that regionals, as they've lost their pilots to the majors, have had to pull out of many, many markets. 58 airports since the pandemic began have lost at least one airline, one major airline. So Delta, United, or American. 58. 11 airports have entirely lost service. 11 regional airports in the US no longer have airline service. You'll note the Pacific Northwest has fared better than most. Twin Falls, Idaho lost United, and Everett Payne Field lost United, but those were the only losses in the West. Most of the losses have been concentrated in the Midwest and the Northeast. But this is going to get worse because there is no magic number of pilots that are going to be trained and ready to go. One of the quirks of pilot regulations in the US is you need 1,500 hours of experience to fly in the right seat of a plane in the US, to fly as a first officer. That number of hours takes about 5 years to accumulate. So those who are starting flight school right now to become pilots won't be available to regional carriers for another 5 years. Now, compare and contrast that with Europe. So you can have a Lufthansa wide body landing at Seattle piloted by a pilot with only 250 hours of experience, while the regional jet, the Horizon Q400, has pilots who both have 1,500 hours of experience. So our pilot training regulations are extreme, and they are causing communities to lose air service. So the good news is the Tri-Cities has become a larger regional hub. We have 18 daily departures scheduled for this summer, about 1,500 departing seats per day this summer. That's within just a few percentage points, 6 percentage points of where we were before the pandemic began. So we've been able to recover almost all of our seats. We're filling seats too. 88% of our seats go out filled only 12% are empty. That is the most in the entire Pacific Northwest. So we fill more seats on a percentage basis than any other market in the Pacific Northwest. That's important because it means we keep the capacity we have. When airlines are looking to cut, it's those communities that are on the very bottom of this list that are in danger. Yakima only fills 57% of its seats, while we're at 88%. So it's important that we fly local. It's important that we use the service that's there. We know that there aren't always seats available now on peak days, but the more we fill up those seats, the more seats we're going to have. And if you look at our monthly screenings, we're back basically to within 10 points of where we were before. But passengers are really being constrained artificially by the number of seats that we have. We would be well above where we were before if we had an unlimited number of seats. Demand in our market is the strongest it's ever been. And you'll note that because of that, the fares that you're seeing are probably higher than you're used to, but that's simply caused by so many seats already being sold that the airline is trying to ensure that there are a few seats left just before departure for those who must travel on that day. And that's why the fare is where it is. The fare is higher because of that. So our passengers are almost back up to where they were in 2019. But the big thing I want to, talking about fares, on average, our fares are 13% less than they were before the pandemic. So the average traveler who's booking, 60 to 90 days in advance is getting a better deal than they were before the pandemic began. I think that's important to understand. And what's driving it? I mean, you guys talk about this all the time at TriDeck, Carl.
Can I ask one question and interrupt just for a second on the kind of like the number of enplanements that we have artificially constrained by just number of seats and then preserving those last minute ones, like you said. Is there an opportunity for maybe some of the airlines to look at larger planes, like if it was on the same schedule or maybe adjust the schedule a little bit, go to a larger plane? And, I mean, I'm looking at you, but it seems like we could fill a bigger plane. I know like Horizon's doing, or they're retiring the Q400s, going to the 175s. That's a little bit larger plane, I think, but does that help us? And is there opportunities there?
Well, yeah, like for example, in Minneapolis, we're going to see Delta put in an Airbus, and those planes have between 124 and 150 seats, depending on the version, instead of a 76-seat jet. So it's twice the number of seats on the same flight. We're seeing a lot of regional jets now on Seattle. Those have the same number of seats as the Q400. They both have 76, but that regional jet is much better for us because it does have the premium seats up front. Gives us 12 first class seats up front. So we have a ton of elite level flyers with Alaska, with Delta in particular, and we know they like their upgrades, so there will be upgrades available. By this time next year, all of our service will be on jets. There will be no more turboprops in our market this time next year. We continue to talk to other carriers about increasing what we call the gauge. That's the size of the plane. Including planning to have a discussion with United about that. So we're working hard on that, because what we would like to do is exactly what you say, increase our capacity, not through more flights a day, but through larger planes. And we certainly can support it. We've had, large planes on Salt Lake City for a long time. We're a market that should have that type of service. And we're bringing the conversation to what you're looking at right now. We're one of the fastest growing markets in the country, growing by 20% since 2010. We really try to key in on where those travelers are coming from, because generally that tells us where we're going to have strong supported service. And so, many from Seattle for obvious reasons, but almost 9% from Portland, 12% from LA. Those are both markets where we don't have a daily flight. And so as we look ahead, the pilot challenge is going to exist for the next couple of years. So we're going to be in competition for aircraft time, but both of those markets are primed for additional service. We have one daily flight to San Francisco. That's a market where we should have more service. We do have less than daily flights to San Diego, which is a big market. We've got less than daily service to Phoenix. And so you look at that and you see those are really our top opportunities for additional service. And it's really, the faster we grow, the more we're going to have available seats for people to get in and out of our community. And I just want to point out our study of ticket data before the pandemic showed that we were losing, even with the service we had, almost 1,400 people a day that were driving to other airports to get on flights. So they're either traveling to or from the Tri-Cities. And 21% of our travelers were driving all the way to Seattle to get on a flight, 10% to Portland. We are working over the very long term to get this number as low as possible. It'll never be zero. We understand that the flights won't work for everyone. Sometimes they're sold out, sometimes there's no choice. But our real mission and my goal in this community is to get our retention well above 50%. That's going to take a lot more seats, but I do think it is doable. So with that, I will not bore anybody with slides anymore, and happy to obviously take questions, and Buck is too, obviously.
That was great, Jack. As always, I think your slides were spot on, and it really kind of shows exactly where we are. Buck, do you have any questions for Jack? Let's start off with that.
Do I have any questions for?
Yeah.
I talked to Jack plenty.
Yeah, his questions don't belong on this program, okay. I'm guessing.
I wanted to give him the chance. Well, let's go to Buck. Buck, there was an article in the Herald just earlier this week about I believe it was an FAA grant that came through some additional spending at Congress that's coming to Pasco. Can you give us kind of an overview on that, on what that specifically that funding will go for?
Yeah, I believe the article that was in the paper was for the Taxiway G project, which that's our airport improvement plan dollars, and that's our entitlement dollars. So we're guaranteed a certain amount every year. We haven't been spending money, so we kind of have a few years saved up, and we got a 7.4, I believe it was, $1 million grant to build this taxiway and get that done, which will then open up some of our land. One, it makes the airfield safer for aircraft traveling, but it also opens up some more land for future development, which we've got some land to develop now. This is just long-term thinking of getting us those new hangar spaces. There is also the bill money, the BIF money, whatever you want to call it, the bipartisan infrastructure funding. We should be seeing some of that funding come through. Hopefully this month we'll hear about. Some of that money we're guaranteed, which we're going to use for some East General Aviation aprons, some more work on the general aviation side. And then if it's approved by the FAA, that's we're still working through that process. And then a snow removal facility for us, because we have a lot of equipment that we have to keep. And right now our building's too small. And we still don't have all the equipment that we need. So we're still kind of growing, and we just don't have the space. So the FAA wants you to have a facility that you can store all of your equipment in. Okay. Then there's also the last pot is the terminal funding. So we've got about $52 million worth of terminal work that we'd like to see done at about year 10. And this money's 95% federal share. So anything we can do to take advantage of that money will benefit us in the long run. And that's what we're trying to do, is just put ourselves in a position to take advantage of some of that money and get some of this terminal work done up front.
Gotcha. So the taxiway money is from the airport improvement plan. And I think isn't the way that works that you have your plans in place, the FAA knows what they are, and then kind of regionally, maybe through the Seattle office, do they shift those dollars around on a yearly basis? Like you said, you haven't kind of used yours for the last couple of years, so you've accumulated it, and they kind of move it around. Is that the way the FAA does to, whichever airport has their project ready to go? Is that kind of the way it works or not?
I mean, I'll give you some credit and say kind of. So we have a 5-year program, a 5-year CIP that's in place, that's approved. And we get $3.2 million a year. That's what we get. Every airport has, that's part of the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, we call it the NIPIAS. If you're part of that, you get some funding. Richland gets it, we get it, Walla Walla gets it. We get a certain amount every year that we're guaranteed once Congress votes to appropriate. I believe it's appropriate the money, if that's the proper term, but we're guaranteed that every year. So that's where this is. There's discretionary funding where the FAA shifts money around, that there's extra money that you can get, but this is our regular just entitlement dollars that was on our plan, our 5-year plan.
Gotcha. You talked about a 10-year, $52 million improvement plan for the terminal. What kind of things are in that plan? Like, what are you planning to do in that 10-year increment
and there's no order in which these are going to happen. A lot of it depends on how much money we get and how we're not real sure of the strings that are going to be attached to that money, because no one's gone through this yet. This is year one. But
okay.
We have plans right now for jet bridges at all the gates except for gate 1, potentially adding another gate off where Legion is, adding another gate, expanding baggage claim, moving the car rentals out next to the rental cars in their own facility, some behind the back of house type stuff that no traveler cares about, but the employees here care about a lot. So it's one of those, do we do stuff that everyone, the traveler wants to see, or do we do stuff to make us operate more efficiently? So there's kind of a fine line that we're walking down to see which path we go. And we could eventually add some more ticketing counter spaces, but that's a pretty big high dollar one that I see is probably more closer to the 10-year time frame than sooner.
But I would just note that brings us back to that other question you had, Karl, which is the size of the plane.
Yeah.
The terminal is built for those, what we call mainline jets. But as we get more and more larger planes, which will happen, especially over the next 10 years, there's going to need to be more space. And we've actually, and all of us have been there talking to the carriers about that. There's going to be more demand to park on jet bridges. There's more demand for all the things Buck is talking about. So I think, should feel really good that there's a plan in place already to make the improvements before the planes are upon us and we're reacting to it as there are problems.
Gotcha. We actually have a question from the audience, and I should remind everybody that if you do have a question, you can ask it, and you're on Zoom with us, you can ask it in the question and answer feature down below. If you're on social media, you can pose your question in the comment section, and we'll do our best to get to everybody. But the question is, if Pasco has the highest percentage of seats filled, does that make it less likely flights will be canceled out of Pasco, or are flight cancellations unrelated to those stats?
Generally, an airline would tell you they're unrelated. So an airline, even if a plane's only booked to 5 people, really doesn't want to cancel that flight if they can avoid it, simply because the cost of rerouting crews and fixing the network challenges a cancellation creates are not worth the savings off of canceling that flight. The other leg of the flight may be 100% booked, and you need to get those people where they're going. So generally, bookings have absolutely nothing to do with cancellations. Airlines are prohibited by law from canceling flights because they're lightly booked. They simply can't do that legally. Now, I will say, you will note, okay, a plane has a maintenance problem. It's going to have to go to the hangar. There are 10 flights departing. All of them are relatively the same distance. They're 9 of the 10 are booked heavily on both legs, and 1 is booked light on both legs. Probably the lightly booked one is the one that's going to get scuttled. But those types of situations don't happen all that frequently. The main causes of cancellations, number 1 is weather, period. And number 2 is maintenance. So there's nothing you can do about weather and maintenance. The airlines try to be as proactive as possible. And so we've actually seen our cancellations are much lower than the region as a whole, and it's horrible when you're on one that's canceled, but it's not generally a major problem at PSC.
Yeah. let's go back to Buck. Buck, on the taxiway that you're planning to build, can you talk a little bit about the development on that side of the airport that you're planning, and what some opportunities might be for some business development on that side?
Well, on that side of the airport, there's probably not much for business development. This is strictly for general aviation private hangars. We're seeing more of a demand in a box style hangar, which is the corporate jet, versus a T hangar, which is a small single engine piston aircraft. So developing and making sure we have the space and everything's ready for development is where we're trying to be. A lot of times we have someone come up and say, hey, I want to build a hangar and you need to put the infrastructure in. And this is June, so the budget's already made, and it's hard for us to jump through hoops and come up with $600,000 or $300 to do something. So we're trying to get all the infrastructure in now. So if someone comes up and says, hey, I want to build a hangar, we're like, well, here's your lots you can pick from, choose where you want to go and go. So that's what we're working on, is just putting ourselves in a position to be competitive. We are looking at, we have some land that's to the north of our parallel runways, and then, east and west of our north-south runway. So we have two different plots of land we're looking at for future business development. Next year, we're looking at doing a study to decide which side would be maybe more readily available to develop, and what types of businesses would go in there. But right now, that's still, it's years out, it's long-term, but we're just trying to plan and take advantage of, again, having a plan will never impede your growth. Not having a plan will. So we're just trying to put things in place to where we're flexible, and we have general basic plan of moving forward for the future. Even if if this could be well after I'm retired, which is 20 years from now, but it's been identified as this is the area, this is what, could go there. It could happen sooner, it could happen later, but we'll have a plan to take advantage of it.
And like you say, from FAA, they want you to have that plan. They want you to have that 5 to 10 year plan out there so that they know what's coming as well, and everybody's kind of on the same page.
Correct.
Yeah. The fun thing that we did, and I get last year and the year before mixed up, but I think it was last year that we rode on the inaugural flight for Avelo Airlines out of the Tri-Cities. From both you guys, how's Avelo doing? And, are there anything else that they might be considering, like for Pasco? And I don't know, Jack, you want to take it first, or Buck?
I can tell you, from the global perspective, Avelo is doing just terrific, both in the Tri-Cities and just their network as a whole. They've also, they have the Burbank service is what we have, nonstop. We flew the inaugural together, the three of us. It was great. I mean, I've been so impressed with the quality of service. It's all one class, economy class, but the service is really excellent on board. The people are wonderful. The flights run on time. The planes are practically brand new, big 737s, very, very comfortable. And to be in LA in 2 hours is just terrific. So they've expanded that Burbank operation pretty significantly. There are 8 or 9 cities, depending on the season, that fly out of there. They do really well. They fly some of those cities also to Las Vegas. In our market, they don't, because we have Allegiant service that's somewhat frequent to Las Vegas, and they don't want to compete. And I don't blame them. Allegiant does great to Las Vegas. They've also started an operation in the East. They've got the Northeast to their New Haven operation in Connecticut down to Florida, all over the place there. What we have to see is how they connect those two operations in the future, the East and West, because that'll really dictate, if they have something mid-continent that's important to us, how that could work. Or if they decide that they're going to fly longer haul, it may sound crazy, but something like a Tri-Cities to Orlando, especially if it's a red-eye and overnight flight, that's something that could be commercially viable. It's a 6-hour flight, but it could be commercially viable. They have a large base at Orlando, so we will continue, obviously, talking with them. The good news, though, Buck, and you see it in the terminal, is that they run very full on it. In fact, Tri-Cities is their #1 market out of Burbank.
Wow.
And I can say from my standpoint, when I look at customer service type things, I kind of just get out and I listen to what people are saying. And when Allegiant first started, not necessarily here, but just in general, you could almost set your clock by when an Allegiant flight left because of the complaints you would start getting from the passengers, or, it was just, and I don't know if it's maybe they're not quite as large as Allegiant was, but we're not having the customer service issues as frequently as we had with Allegiant. They're almost carbon copies of each other, I think, as far as service they're providing. But the customer service, the level of it from the initial go has been very good. I've been impressed with that.
And I just want to say, Allegiant's operating great now. By the way,
Yeah.
We don't want to imply that Allegiant is so reliable now, because they have almost all brand new planes too. They're all Airbus. The model that's behind Karl there, that's an old MD-80 Allegiant. They got rid of those. Allegiant has grown up. They're a big airline now. I mean, and they do a terrific job too. But Avelo from the get-go has been just terrific. And I think we were really fortunate that we were in position to be one of their first markets. I think we were on the second flight ever of Avelo as a flight we were on, and to be in position, because we don't have other service to LA, it really is our lifeline to the LA basin. And Burbank's a great airport. If you haven't flown through Burbank, I mean, I know we all really liked it, but it's so close to everything, and you don't have the hassle of LAX. I really encourage you to use it.
I've heard nothing but good things from the community. People just talk to me. I mean, they tell me bad things, but they've gone out of their way to say that flight to Burbank is awesome. So that's good to hear.
It really is. I know our family's looking forward to, taking a vacation, maybe going to Disneyland. I remember when we walked out of the terminal, which was nice. I mean, it's small, it's not huge. It's obviously, a lot older than the Pasco terminal, which is like state of the art, but just walking out, you could look up on the hill and you could see like Universal Studios from the Burbank airport, like across, the way. And I mean, it's so central to your point, Jack, and you don't have to deal with LAX and the traffic and everything. And you're kind of on that side of LA. But Jack, do you see an opportunity? And I mean, that's an interesting point you bring up, where Avelos wants to go, where they're building this East Coast base as well. But would that be something that maybe they could do to compete with like a Southwest, that actually you can fly across the country based on where you're at, through, maybe it's a three-legged flight instead of a two-legged, but is that something you think they may want to compete in? And I guess the big question is can you make money? And I think there's so many variables, it seems like right now in the industry, right, between pilot shortages and then fuel prices, which are got to be through the roof. Maybe it's a tough time to predict where they might go.
Well, yeah, so they have noted that some of their things that they were going to start Avelo, like Charleston, South Carolina, they're not going to start because of fuel prices. I just want to take a moment and talk about fuel for a second. This time last year, the average price per gallon that an airline was paying was about $2.15. Right now, it's about $4.03. So it's almost double. And fuel is about 18 to 20% of an airline's total cost of operation. So when you double that piece, that means the total cost of operations up maybe 11 or 12%, not including the fact you don't have as many pilots, so you can't fly the plane as much every day, which means your lease payment on that plane isn't covered by as many tickets as it was before. So you're seeing fare creep to cover increasing costs, and it is changing how airlines want to do business. They don't necessarily want to fly as long a haul flights as they were before. Just because of the overall cost. You don't want to, for a network carrier, for example, you don't want to overfly the hub. And a good example there is before the pandemic started, we were slated to get service to Chicago on United. We're going to have nonstops. United would much rather, with fuel prices where they are, just continue serving Denver and connect our passengers through Denver so they don't have to hang that plane in the air an extra 2 hours. Sure. And get to the same cities, but you do it with shorter segments along the way. Now, with Avelo, their business model is built incredibly simply. There's no connections. Everything is just one segment, one nonstop. That's all you fly. So I don't see them changing that model where you would have stops along the way. Everything's going to be a simple nonstop, no connecting flights whatsoever, because you're able to gauge your costs for the segment. You know exactly what you need to charge, and you can pretty well ensure that on a segment by segment basis, you're profitable, where there's a lot of complexity with pricing in a network. Avelo isn't really designed to compete with anyone except for the couch, to be honest with you. I mean, they're not competing with Allegiant. They fly to a different place. They're not competing with the car because LA is so far to drive. They just want to get you off your couch for a weekend. And they do it by the fare is just as cheap as if you drove over and went to Seattle for the weekend or came down to Portland for the weekend. And so that's really how they think about it, is how can we economically get people, you know, to go different places, and it's worked. And that's really what Allegiant did. And that's what, you know, these low cost carriers do. The other note, and not to, you know, go on forever, but you mentioned Southwest, and the biggest question I get everywhere I go, because I represent airports all over really North America, is how come Southwest doesn't fly to our city? And I work for Bellingham, and Southwest does fly to Bellingham now. And we get, you know, as soon as Bellingham was announced, of course, the people in the Tri-City said, well, why Bellingham and not us? And so I just want to take a moment and explain. So Bellingham, Southwest isn't flying there because of Bellingham. They're flying there because Vancouver is a half an hour away, and there are 2 million people in Vancouver. And Southwest doesn't fly to Canada. And so they're able to get the Canadian market by flying to Bellingham. So that's their goal at Bellingham. And I will say the service, since that border opened, is doing just terrific. Our market is still just a little bit too small. Now, they also fly to Eugene, which really isn't much larger. It's about a third larger than the Tri-Cities. But right now, we need to see that continue population growth for probably roughly another 10 years. And then we would be large enough for Southwest, because the minimum really they want to come in with is 4 departures a day. That's just a ton of seats. That would represent half of our seats.
Yeah.
So as we grow, though, that will become an opportunity for the airport.
Yeah. Thanks for that description. That makes a lot of sense. The other one that was fun to go out to, Buck invited me, and I was able to take my son Henry out to the ribbon cutting for AHA, that inaugurated service, and it was last year. I think it was the end of the year. But Buck, how's AHA doing? And obviously they just fly kind of the same model, just not a hub, but directly to Reno and back. And I think there's a connection maybe with some of the hoteliers in that market to help with the flight. But how are things going on AHA?
I want to have Jack explain this one. He's more in tune with that, and he can probably give a better example or better explanation than I can.
Well, it's very similar model, right, to the Avelo model. It's flights to Reno, and the idea is to get you guys, you know, off the couch and get all of us off the couch and get us down to Reno for a weekend, or we know somebody down there, or get to Tahoe. I mean, we see in the wintertime, a lot of the people were going up to Tahoe. And I think we'll see that too in the summer, a lot of people going up to Tahoe. The other nice thing about it is it is designed to get those who live in Reno up to the Tri-Cities, Wine, River, all that stuff. So we'll see a lot of reverse flow this summer. It's a little less risky of a model because the plane only has 50 seats. So we really only need 25 couples a week to go there or come up, and we fill it up. The company is good. It's ExpressJet is the company that owns this brand. They've been around forever. They're 49% owned by United Airlines. Reliable, good people working there. And so it's just nice to have another opportunity and another place that we can get to. You know, we were again in the first round of that. And what that shows you is when airlines are looking to expand, they look to us right away. And it's because of what's going on. And it's because we have really, Buck and I have easy things to communicate, you too, Karl, to the carriers when we go to meet with them, is all the news is good. We were just, I'm not speaking out of school saying this. I mean, the three of us were just over at Alaska Airlines headquarters for a meeting, because we like to keep in touch with our airlines, and the first thing they said is, what is going on in the Tri-Cities? Oh my gosh, the demand is through the roof. We can't get enough seats in there. And so it's a heck of a lot more fun, being in that situation where airlines are clamoring to start service than a situation of a lot of other communities in this country that are losing all service altogether. It's very unusual.
No, that's a great point, Jack. And I know, just like you said, you represent a lot of the smaller airports and regional airports. Can you talk just a little bit, without getting into too much, because it's kind of a doom and gloom story for a lot of communities, but I mean, it just makes sense economically that, the larger regional hubs, which is Pasco, are going to continue to grow. And then the smaller airports that just have minimal flights that are even being cut back now, like you described, in the pilot shortage and fuel. What do you see as the future there, Jack? What's going on? And clearly this is your business, so you talk about this every day.
We try to be as futurist as we can, and then something like the pandemic happens and everything that we thought was going to happen gets blown up. But generally the trends happen, right? There has been a migration to larger urban areas. There has been a movement of aircraft to these areas. There has been an increase in large aircraft serving regional markets. We know these trends are going to continue. For the Tri-Cities, we're going to see larger planes. We're going to see continued expansion in our low-cost area. We're going to continue to work on connecting the hubs that we're missing, namely Dallas, LA, Chicago. For the smaller communities, that's where we really have challenges. It's not quite as bad in the Pacific Northwest because we do have isolation, but your area is actually a little bit of an exception to that because you're not isolated like a Medford. I mean, you are, but you don't have, or Medford doesn't have these satellite communities that you have, Yakima, Walla Walla. Alaska has, we have to go off what they say, and they say they will not leave a market, period. And I really hope that that's true. But over time, in places like central Michigan and central Illinois, in eastern Iowa, we're seeing the larger airports continue to grow and the smaller airports continue to shrink to the point where I have concerns smaller airports will not have service in the future. Yeah. Now, in a lot of ways, it makes sense to regionalize service, but no community wants to lose service completely. Yeah. It's such an economic driver. Even if you're an hour away from an airport, you still don't want to lose service. A Walla Walla doesn't want to lose service. Well, I would tell you Walla Walla has an absolutely terrific airport. It's called Tri-Cities Airport. I live in Portland. I flew back last night and it took me an hour to get to my house in the city of Portland from PDX. And I didn't think anything of an hour-long drive to get to an airport. So I think you will see that regionalization. And then the other thing, there are two other things I think that are going to happen. Large airports are getting more and more saturated. So satellite airports within metro areas are going to grow, like Painfield at Everett. I think you'll see a satellite to Portland in the next 10 years that will grow, probably for low-cost carriers. And then we have to really see the impact of the electrification of regional aircraft. So United Airlines, for example, has an order for about 100 aircraft that will be entirely electrically powered and can be charged in an hour, that carry 30 people. If those aircraft can indeed efficiently operate with battery power that can charge that quickly, that will change air service too, because 20% of your cost of operation goes away overnight. That's the fuel cost. The electric cost is very, very tiny. That will make a lot of things economic that aren't today. For example, like we could easily, if that happened, have 5 or 7 flights a day to Portland, because that aircraft would be perfect for that. Yeah. You could have regional service at places like Boise. If that type of aircraft happens, it's going to change kind of how we're served. We'll still have, the mainline aircraft going to Denver and those kind of things, but we will have more regional service. So we're not confident that's going to happen, but that's really, when we're thinking futurist, that's the way we're thinking. I don't think the small air taxi thing is going to have much impact on us. The way the FAA wants to regulate those, they're going to be almost impossible to fly because you're going to need a pilot's license, and most of us aren't going to have one.
Is that like the human-sized rotor, multi-rotor aircraft?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't think that's going to be the revolution that many want to. I mean, everybody's been predicting flying cars for the last, what, 100 years. That's not where the future really lies in electric regional, if the technology can handle it. And we still have no idea if it can.
Right. I'll throw hydrogen power as well. I think there's a firm in Moses Lake actually that's doing some research on a hydrogen powered aircraft. And then, here regionally, we have the Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative that's been active since 2009, and transportation's one of the subcommittees that we have. And of course, hydrogen's another one. There's this huge DOE hydrogen hub grant that a lot of communities across the country are working on. And I know aviation, it's a potential. There's still, to your point about electric, there's still a lot of technology that needs to be developed. And of course, everybody in aviation remembers that the Hindenburg, which was, full of hydrogen and had a problem back in the late 30s, but still there's, from an energy density and turnaround and, fuel handling and stuff like that, it seems like there's a couple different technologies that could do that. And I'm looking at Buck to see if he's got an opinion on it, but I think the other thing that's kind of out there to alleviate some of these shortages is automation, right? Especially affecting pilots and the regulatory environment too. And you already talked about that, Jack, that we're, different from Germany or other countries that we think is more highly regulated than we are. But in pilot training, I think you gave a great analogy. Using automation to go to one certified pilot instead of having to have two, and or someday even autonomous planes. That's to a certain degree the planes fly themselves today. So Buck, any guesses on in the future will we be going to Pasco to get on a robot plane, or what do you think?
Well, I hope I don't see that in my life. I don't know if Tesla can't even get a driving car down right. I don't know if plane would be much better. I assume we will eventually get there, but I'm not excited for it. I'm not excited for one pilot in the cockpit, to be honest with you. There's a lot of times where one pilot can override the other and solve the issue more so than just having one guy in there that gets overwhelmed in an emergency situation. I think two pilots are there mostly for stressful times, not for just sitting there when the plane's on cruise control, because they really do work together to solve problems. And I think that's important. For me, I personally feel safer. That doesn't mean it won't happen. I imagine we will get there eventually, but I still think we're a ways out on that.
Yeah.
And I would just say, I agree with Buck. I think there's more political reasons it won't happen. We could solve a lot of the pilot issue today if we just reverted to the 2008 law that allowed a first officer to have 250 hours. That's not happening because you think about how strong the pilots union is. The strength of pilots unions, I think, will keep, at least for passenger operations, will keep two pilots in the cockpit, at least until we're probably all in the ground. I think in cargo, you could potentially see it sooner, but it's probably a decade away or more. I think there are more immediate things that can be done to alleviate problems we have, but let's be honest, if you're a pilot, and you have enough hours already, this shortage has been terrific for you because you're getting best-in-class contracts and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Not that you don't work hard. These pilots, I mean, they face losing their job every 6 months when they go through their testing. So it's a very stressful job. And when things go wrong, like Buck says, holy cow, you better know what you're doing. But with the strength of the unions in their lobbyists in DC, I just don't see it going that way.
Just out of curiosity, what's their position? Is it safety? Is it lowering stress for pilots on planes? That they hold that position, and obviously it benefits them because it gives them larger number of people that are in their organization and stuff. I mean, are there any other reasons?
It's safety. The argument is safety. It's safer. There's very little data that proves that that training level is safer. So a little background, and not to go too far back, but there was an accident in, I think it was actually 2009, in Buffalo, where a Q400 aircraft operating on the Continental brand got into icing conditions and it crashed. And so the change in pilot hour qualifications happened after that as a response to that crash. That's when that law was changed. So you went from 250 hours for a first officer to 1,500. Both of the pilots on that aircraft had over 2,500 hours of training.
Yeah.
The training and the number of hours had absolutely nothing to do with that crash. Both of those pilots lived on the West Coast and had flown all night and had been up for 36 hours when they got into the icing and didn't realize they were stalling. They were exhausted. The commuting regulations, which could have fixed these type of problems, did not change. And so we fixed a problem that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And because of the strength of those unions, the problem, we've created a different problem that now we can't fix.
Yeah. You know, as we were talking earlier, I was just thinking of the way it used to be to travel. And, you know, planes are full, just like you said, which every plane coming out of Pasco is full, which is really, really good for us. But, you know, planes used to be not as full. And I think back to when that was, if it was pre 9/11 or kind of that gap between 9/11 and the pandemic. But, you know, so much has changed in scheduling and obviously security. But I think, you know, the days of not having somebody in the middle seat right next to you are kind of gone, right? I mean, that just helps the airlines. That's more efficiency. I mean, I don't think we'll ever get back to those days, right, Jack? Because that was driven by, you didn't have the pilot shortage. Fuel was relatively cheap to what it is now. And I mean, they're never going to schedule that many planes that kind of let you stretch out and stuff unless, you know, something goes wrong, right? I mean, we can't like look back to nostalgia and go like, oh, I can't wait till I can, you know, have an open center seat. It's not going to happen.
It's always the golden days, right?
Yeah.
So you go back to the early 1990s and fuel for the airlines was in the neighborhood of 20 cents a gallon. So at that fuel price, with the aircraft that they were flying, they could easily afford to target 60% of seats filled and make money with where fares are. Because on an inflation adjusted basis, the fare in the early 1990s was almost double what the average fare is today. Flying has never been cheaper. And so as fares have declined over time and fuel has increased, airlines by necessity have to fill all of their seats. They've gotten very sophisticated in their pricing models and being able to do so. Pricing models, and go back to the late 80s, early 90s, were very simple. There was maybe 3 or 4 different fares on every flight. We're aiming for 60%, we're good to go. Now you're trying to optimize every single seat that you put into the air. And airlines are good at that. But with where costs are, pilots are expensive, flight attendants are more expensive. They're harder to find, just like every industry. I mean, I'm sure you see, Karl, that it's very difficult to find employees anywhere, and airlines have the exact same problem. So you're having to pay more and more. Your ground staff costs more. Not that that's a bad thing. We want people to be able to make a good living working for these airlines. But with where fares are and the fact that on an inflation adjusted basis, they're so low, if you don't fill the entire plane, you don't make money. So a break even was around 60% of seats filled back in the early 90s. The break even right now is around 86%. Wow. You got to fill about 86% of your seats to break even. And keep in mind, that means 100% of seats are filled on Thursdays, Fridays, Sundays, Mondays, because on a Tuesday, you're probably only filling 70%. You have to make up for that. You have to have the schedule continuity throughout the week. We always think about too, oh, it's so great. I felt like I had so much leg room and all that. The leg room since the 80s really hasn't changed in economy class. It's about the same. The seat's exact same width as it was. Now you've got a TV screen or streaming entertainment to your you don't have to watch that big screen in front. Oh, first class was so great. They carved, you know, my meal table side. And yeah, but you were in a recliner where a guy reclined right into your face. Now you get a lie flat suite where nobody's reclining into you. So I would argue the golden days actually are right now, because anyone can afford to get on a plane, just about. Anyone can go anywhere at any time, testing and pandemic notwithstanding. And the hard product on the plane is actually better than it's ever been before. We've never had planes as nice as we have them today. But we always like the nostalgia. And would you trade the nice plane for an empty seat? Probably you would. I know when I was sitting next to you guys, I felt like I was squeezed against a window. So like this, but I should have been like Buck and like, push everybody out of the way. But I would just argue, accessible travel is more important than the overall experience.
That's a good point. Buck, what do you think? Anything to add to Jack's comments about nostalgia and where airline travel is today versus, back in the golden years?
I think he's spot on. I'm fairly young, so traveling in the golden years, I know I did. I just don't remember it as much as traveling now. And I don't really struggle with how booked the planes are. I expect them to be full. If they're not full, I'm more like, oh wow, this flight must not be doing very well. That's like the thought that comes into my head. I wonder how long this flight will be here.
Yeah.
So I mean, I expect to see full planes. When I fly out of the Tri-Cities, I couldn't tell you a time when I've almost seen more than 3 or 4 open seats. Flights are always full. When I go into other markets, there's a lot more open seats. So
yeah,
I just expect it now. So I haven't really thought much of, how great it used to be. So.
And I would just say too, yeah, like if I fly into one of my client markets and the plane doesn't have very many people on it, I get a pit in my stomach.
Oh, sure.
So every time I fly into the Tri-Cities, I'm so happy that plane is full because it just takes a little bit of weight off my shoulders.
Wow. No, that's a good point. And I think it's always that perspective with nostalgia that we forget about. We think it used to be better. And I think you bring up some great points, Jack. The other thing I was thinking about fuel is, here in the Tri-Cities, Pacific Northwest National Lab and WSU Tri-Cities have a couple of joint institutes where they do specific research in a shared area. One of those is around biofuels for aviation fuels. I know they've had the president of Alaska Airlines over and had conversations about that. And it's interesting because the technology, I think, works in the lab. I think that they've worked on some scaled demonstrations, but it's not at a production capacity. But the limiting factor there has been the cost of fuel. And so now when the cost of fuel is twice as what it was, I think it might open up some market sensibilities. Now you'd assume that the price of petroleum base would go back down, but it could open up opportunities here because a lot of what they're using for feedstocks is actually agricultural residue. It's again, for the Tri-Cities, because we have the research, because we have the agricultural base, there might be some future economic opportunities for us around those biofuels for aviation. Because I think every aviation company has said that they want to convert to cleaner fuels that don't use petroleum products. So that could be an opportunity.
It's absolutely right. In Alaska, they have an eco demonstrator 737 in partnership with Boeing that is flying on biofuel. United has, they call it Eco Skies, a 737. United is putting a small percentage of all fuel on its planes at LAX is biofuel, algae-based. The key is going to be, can we produce biofuel at, like you said, it's about manufacturing. Can we produce it at a level where it can be used and either supplement or take over for regular fuel without damaging what we need for essentially agriculture?
Yeah.
And that's where the technology has to go. United Airlines, for example, wants to be entirely biofuel by 2050.
Wow.
So that's really not that far away. That's 28 years. That's fast. And we'll see if it happens, but so the industry has got to go that way. Aviation only accounts for 2% of the CO2 emissions in the world, but 2% is still a ton.
Yeah. And
the industry has got to work on it.
No, that's a good point. Well, it is time for us to sign off. I every time we get together, whether it's, going together to go into a airline headquarter or having one of these coffee with Karl discussions, I always learn something. It's always good to see you guys. Buck, you want to sign us off with any words of wisdom or any closing remarks?
I just continue to be thankful that majority of the folks are choosing to fly out of the Tri-Cities Airport, and we work hard to put out a good product and to continue to enhance our product and get new flights or more flights or more seats. We're working at it constantly. It's tough right now, but we're grateful for all the passengers that fly out, and we just again going to continue to do our best to get the community the service that they deserve.
That's great. And obviously Pasco Airport's a huge community asset that we're all
It's the
supportive of.
Tri-Cities Airport, Carl. Tri-Cities.
Tri-Cities Airport, huge community
The
asset.
mug reminds me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I brought the wrong mug. I got the Port of Pasco on my mind. But you guys do a great job and totally represent all of us as the gateway to our community. So thanks for everything that you guys are doing. Jack, closing remarks.
I just really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about it. You know, the key is use the local airport. I say that in every community, but in this community, it has resulted in better connectivity than we've ever had before. And the more you use it, the more flights we're going to be able to get for you to use.
That's exactly right. Well, Jack and Buck, thanks for your time today. For everybody listening to us out there, remember, fly out of the Tri-Cities Airport. That's the way that we're going to continue to get better service and better flights out of there. So thanks for your time today, guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you later. Thanks.
Thanks, Karl.
Bye.
Bye.